So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to what is today's session on migrancy and filmmaking, and the themes that run through the three films that are being presented today by a wonderful and esteemed panel. I want to welcome our panelists here today. I see we have Stefan Arsenijevíc. If I've pronounced it wrong, please forgive me. Stefan is an amazing filmmaker. I have to say I was riveted by the film and the angst and the pathos that it showed about humanity in a present day issues of migrancy. He's a lecturer at the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Belgrade, has been a program manager of the Goethe Institute, First Training Program for Southeast European directors since 2016. And he's received over 30 international accolades for his 10 short films, including a Gold Bear at Berlinale and the European Film Academy Award and an Oscar nomination for his short film. So welcome, Stefan, to this panel, and thank you for bringing us this amazing film.
Thank you very much.
He deserves no introduction. He's an incredible filmmaker, director, screenwriter, cinematographer, all rolled into one. And of course, is regarded as one of Europe's most experienced and compelling directors. We want to welcome you here today, Erik, and to give us some insight to this amazing film that you've made. Prof. Pragna Rugunanan is an authority on the issues of migrancy in present day, the world as it stands presently. And so we welcome you onto this panel. I'm going to give you each a brief minute to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourself and the films that you make. What attracts you to the different themes? And maybe I can start with you, Erik.
Well, thank you. Basically, I'm into this seminar today here with you guys because basically my latest movie, The Emigrants, are quite close related to what we're going to talk about today. My background, well, this is my 9th feature movie. Along other titles I've done, a lot of my movies are sort of taking part in things I have been experiencing in my life, my former life as a journalist in conflict areas during the 1980s into the 1990s when I was hospitalized and I quit it and I started to study film and then started to doing movies about issues in the world as I see it today. A lot of stories about immigration, about humanity. And now with this historical piece taking place in the 1850s, the stories about Europeans who have to escape and travel abroad the North Atlantic to their new country in North America. So basically, probably that's the reason why I'm in this seminar.
Thank you, Erik. Stefan, if I can give you the platform now.
Thank you. So I guess I'm here because in the festival is my feature film called As Far As I Can Walk. This is my 2nd feature film. And I come from Serbia, and we were a very important hotspot in so-called migrant Balkan route. So this film deals with about that, and actually it's a love story. And what I did is, but we can talk later on about it, why I actually used medieval traditional Serbian epic song that is very popular and very well known here. It's a very important part of our cultural heritage. And I made a modern version of it using migrants as main characters. I set it in the microcosmos of migrants. So yeah, this is my 2nd feature film. And I don't know what to add. But
that's wonderful, Stefan. Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And Pragna, if you could tell us a little bit about your research and what it is that you would like to highlight about the issues of migrancy.
Thank you very much, Liza, for inviting me to this very important festival, and especially to a theme that is so close to my heart. My work is on migration, and I think very broadly on migration as well. You know, there's so many aspects to it. More recently, since 2016, I focused on South Asian migration to South Africa, looking at particularly Pakistani, Indian nationals and Bangladeshi male migrants migrating to South Africa, more especially in terms of maybe as economic migrants, as undocumented migrants in search of better places to work. But my research more generally touches on 3 to 4 aspects about gender and migration. So the themes of feminization of migration, which came up in the 3 movies, you know, they're looking at women and how the supportive role, the roles that they play within the migration process, looking at family migration, which is something that came up quite strongly in Erik's movie. So those are some of the areas that I work on and do research with my students, but also other aspects that is coming to the fore is use of digital technology during the migration process. More recently, I was involved with the UN, and in 2024, it's the UN Year of the Family. And so the focus has moved back to about the family and what role does the family play and how important is the family during this migration process. So who determines what are the decisions to migrate? Who makes that important decision? How does it affect men and women differently in the migration process? And then very importantly, where there are gaps in research, you know, generally and overall, particularly within the African context, is what about the children that are left behind? What impact does it have on the family left behind when women migrate? And more recently, not more recently, but generally, we've always had this notion that only men migrate, particularly in the African context. But women have been migrating as long as men have, but it's just in how we count the numbers. And so with women migrating more independently on their own and not just as an appendage of men, we find that the migration story completely changes. But how the family who sends the family where the woman migrates from, how they treat her, how the community treats her. And yet when she comes back or when she sends remittances back, how that is received by the family. So there's so many different dynamics to migration that we can unpack and talk about. And I'm so happy to see that all these 3 movies begin to touch on these different aspects in different ways. But I think the most important thing for me was, I think it was in Stefan's movie where the director says, I am not a migrant, I am a human. And it's about the humanness that all 3 movies talk about that touched me so. So, yeah.
Thank you, Pragna. That's amazing. And that's what also touched me is the humanity and and that people living on the peripheries strive so hard to be seen as humans, you know, and strive so hard despite the hardship. So I'm going to speak to you, Stefan, and start out by asking you, in terms of referencing migrancy and using that particular poem as an allegory to this almost anti-hero. Can you speak to me what attracted you to the story and why did you need to tell the story? You told it with a great deal of passion and it was really a profound film. Can you speak to how your film then references migrants and what is your passion for this particular topic that you could tell it in such a remarkable way?
Well, thank you very much, first of all. Well, you were talking about struggling and the periphery, and I would say that, you know, I'm from Serbia, which was Yugoslavia, and I always felt I was living in a periphery of Europe. So, you know, having this, you know, when the migrant crisis started and when I saw this really hundreds of people every day on the streets who were lost, who were exhausted, and during these years of the peak of migrant crisis, some more than 1 million people passed by through Belgrade, which has 1.5 million people living in it. So it was very visible and it was strong, and actually it was not so something very new for me, because it very much reminded me on the refugees we had during the wars in Yugoslavia in the 90s. I grew up, you know, in the elementary school and high school. There was always some, you know, some pupils coming. A lot of my friends are refugees, were refugees at that time, and also I've experienced the war, experienced the poverty. So I had a feeling, you know, I could very easily relate to these people. On the other hand, when I was watching the media, I always had a feeling they are never portrayed as human beings. It's just some numbers or victims or some conquerors who are going to change our way of life forever, you know, depending on the political agenda. And I was interested in people, so I really actually started talking with them, with migrants, and then I understood there is, you know, groups and groups of different migrants who have different rights, who are not, you know, which is, you know, something that you don't really see in media, and we try to portray it a little bit in our film. So my main goal was to get this, you know, human stories. And then at the same time, I was thinking about doing the modern adaptation of this very traditional, very old, very well-known epic poem. It's a basically love story about a love triangle, and I always liked it because, unlike other epic poems that we have in our culture, this main character is a hero, not because he fights well. I mean, he fights well as well, but he is a hero because he has empathy, he can understand, he can forgive, and he loves. And that was something that is completely stands out from all the rest. And I always thought this is something that these are some things that we need in this times. I have a feeling in the world we live in that people, they just, you know, you always have just two options and you have to take the side. Otherwise you're, I don't know, if you're not with us, you're with others. I hate that. And to go back, I'm talking too much probably. So at some point I met a very interesting young man from Ghana. His name is Ibrahim Ishak, and he, unlike most of other migrants, because we are a poor country, most of them want to go to the West. He wanted to stay here, and he was learning the language, and you know, it was good enough for him to be in our country, and that strikes me. It was interesting. At the same time, so I started thinking, what if I do this adaptation of something very Serbian traditional with a character that is like him? So we really build up a character around this real person, and then things started to unfold. It's we tried to, I don't know, stay true to the story, to the point, but also change it as much as we can to reflect the modern times and the modern relationship, especially between couples, you know, because after all, it's more than anything else a love story. I don't know if I answered the question, but I spoke a lot.
Stefan, you did. You gave us amazing insight, so we are really, really thankful for that. I need to mention that Aga, our other filmmaker, could not join us because she's very unwell, and she extends her apologies. So for those who are waiting for Aga to also join in our conversation, unfortunately, she could not be with us. So on to you, Erik. In terms of talking particularly about your film and the issues of migrancy, it's quite a unique take that you told the story, because that story has been told many times before, but you took on a really fresh take on the issue of migrancy, because usually in the media what we see is an influx of migrants coming from Africa or from India or Pakistan and traveling across, and you see these very sad imagery of migrancy that gives you and people being dismissed from lands that they feel, that those who live on it feel that they don't belong. So speak to us about why you chose this particular story and how it connected with you, and a little bit of background to the story itself.
I was presented for 4 really famous novels who were written in the 1930s and 1940s. Really well told story, one large story of a group of people who in the 1840s were living in so hard conditions that the kids were dying, and there were religious suppressions. So they were either sent to prison because they believed in something else, or they were dying of hunger. Hard to believe that people could do that in Scandinavia, but they really did. Now, when I read it, and they asked me to look into this subject. They asked me because I was into the subject of migration and before, but and I said I turned it down because I really didn't see the reason to take this huge epic story into the world of today. But then I discovered there was this one single story going through all these 4 novels, the story about this family of Karl Oskar and Christina, the husband and wife, and their small kids, and how they were living, and how they really lost one of their children in hunger and were hunger-related conditions, and then they had to travel, go to the coast, cross this ocean, which really took so many lives, and arrive this new continent, which they really didn't know anything about, and try to, find a new home with no contact with the language or the culture at all. And most of all, and what I saw was actually not the story about the husband and his family, but about the mother, the story about women who are going into this, who are making this choice. And the story that Willem Moberg wrote in the 1930s about this family, it just felt so absolutely authentic to the stories of people, coming to Europe today, and I felt that, okay, if I, by telling this story, could, sort of remind the audience in a Europe, in a political climate today, where when we discuss migration, it's so hard to discuss it because, either you are for or you're against. I mean, it's sort of like, it's so hard. There's hard rhetoric and so hard language used. So I wanted to see, okay, if I, at least by bringing the audience into a world representing themselves, reminding them that the people who escaped that time or had to leave their homes are the same people who today are leaving their homes, coming to our continent. And since I felt that the story was so well written, the only thing I really needed to do was to remove everything else in these novels, take this single story, and then also sit down with a lot of my friends, which have arrived to Norway and Sweden during the last 10, 20 years, and interview a lot of the mothers and a lot of the grown-up children, and try to get as close as a good image idea of the family dynamics. What part does the mother play in these family dynamics, and how does it look like? And I wanted to see if I could get some fire into the debate, at least in Scandinavia, about this issue. That was the idea, and the studio who were supporting this film were brave enough to give me full responsibility to just go in and dig into this story. And by doing all these interviews, just not bring all these stories into the story about Christina and Karlovska, but actually rather at least just remind us all about the similarities that they are so close connected. So that was basically the reason why I brought up the story, and I wanted to fulfill it.
Erik, that's beautiful, and it gives us such incredible insight into the filmmaking process and your thinking behind the filmmaking process and how profound that was. You mentioned you wanted to bring this to Scandinavia. What was the reaction from Scandinavia when they saw the movie? What was some of the reactions?
Well, probably not too. I wasn't surprised. We wasn't surprised, but there were people who were upset, and what of course was important for me to mention into this is that there are different worlds for people to arrive. Now, when people went to North America, there was land enough for everyone. You know, different to the world today, because people, when they arrive to the Europe, we know that there is absolutely another arrival. There are, you know, really different conditions for people to arrive here. But still, what turned people up and made them angry was basically just the fact that trying to humanize the story, to go behind the story and teach people how to learn who they are, who we all are, was upsetting them. In fact, of course, there were political agendas behind them, and we know who they were, and they made the reactions now again, as I've also received in some of my early movies, threats and you know, all these classical issues. But there were obviously reasons for me to do this, because being an artist in the world today, I see our role as an artist is to go into these topics, these issues, and raise the questions, bring out the story, not teach people, not teach the audience how to sort of, I don't want to come up with the answers, but I really sure want to bring up sort of the issues, which I think are the reason for art. And so some reactions were also, well, why didn't you go further in to tell how to behave and such and so, or how to react? But I think more or less it was divided in two. It was the major reaction has been in the countries it has been distributed now, that people are being connected to the story, to the people. And there are those few who really feel it's a political film, or, you know, things like that.
That's truly brave filmmaking, Erik, and I'm so glad you made it. I think it's what the world needs to see, that there's humanity everywhere, and that and these stories continue of humanity are continue to tell itself, you know, and across the world. So, and it's the same kind of story. So I think that is quite beautiful. Pragna, I want to ask you, Stefan touched on the issue of a crisis, a migrant crisis. What is your perception of that? Is there a migrant crisis as you see it, and from the research you've made? And then I think that Erik also spoke to the issue of women and migrancy and things that you see very clearly on how this compounded marginalization, if I may say, for women migrants. Could you also speak to that?
Sure, thanks, Liza, and thanks to my two colleagues as well for their very interesting portrayals of their movies. I mean, I think the movies for me were just brought home the whole human identity about migration, what migration is all about. And when you say the crisis of migration and whether there is there a crisis. You know, it depends where you are, whether you're situated, and some people will take offense to me using the binaries of global north and global south, and how we perceive this, whether it is a crisis. Is there a crisis in our country because it impacts on my security, on my nation state, on my resources, which is what Erik alluded to just now, and how, you know, if we don't have enough resources, this then creates a conflict, isn't it? And that's where this thing then all unpacks into, is migration a crisis? So I think, you know, it's such a deep and complex system that you're talking about, that it's really very difficult to give a one-word answer. There is no clear answer to it. I think COVID, and I'm going to go a little bit broader than this, is COVID and the Ukraine war has just demonstrated how fragile our life worlds are. Is that not so? And that change can take place instantaneously, how quickly time and events change, and that anyone can become a migrant, or we can become displaced. That we can no longer assume that we are immune to social issues. It will affect any one of us, whether it's death, illness, the pandemic that's taken place, or even the rapid onset of climate change, how that is now going to become the driver of migration. And so what is ours today can perhaps tomorrow, it will no longer be there. And so how do we claim authority or belonging to this stuff, to something that, you know, we don't have a right to? So I think we need to take cognizance that having this universalistic approach to understanding migration realities undermines the fact that both experience and knowledge is very contextual. The festival's theme of innocence and beyond is quite important because it shows how we connect with each other, how interdependent and intertwined our lives really are. And that was part of the brief of the festival. You know, this theme is all about belonging. And I think one of the most important things is that the history of humanity is about migration. Humans have always moved. And part of this movement is about finding a space where we belong and a sense of belonging. It's about history meeting the present, as Erik so eloquently put it there. It's about people from all walks of life having to find a way in a world where we're constantly feeling, do we belong? Are we misplaced? Are we on the margins or on the periphery? And as academics, we would say, are we an insider or outsider to these cities? What gives us the right to belong? And how do we claim as migrants, claim a sense of belonging to the city? And I think something that the three movies provide quite nicely is evocative images of love, because is love not the connecting or connection that brings us all together as humans? And I think that comes out so strongly in Stefan's movie, you know, that drives the actions of the main character there. But in the second movie, and unfortunately, you know, the director's not here, but what the movie then brings out, and something that other movies also touch on, is about the other and how do we construct, how do we perceive this other? And this is what we're talking about, which leads to this crisis. So if we think of the other person, the migrant as the other, we're obviously not embracing our true humaneness, which is to accept everybody for who they are. And so we create this image that the other is always conflictual. They're bringing in crime, they're bringing in harbingers of disease, you know, and so that is the narrative that we create about the other. So how do we feel and relate to people that are different? One of the themes is also about the innocence of belonging, and how do we claim? I like this point that was also raised, I think, in your narrative of the movie's theme as a whole, is about cultural innocence, and something that Stefan used quite nicely in his movie, you know, and I was deliberating a little bit about that. But the third movie, I mean, obviously, as you said, revolves around the mother and the family, and as the family evolves. I think what is, for me, what there are hints and undertones of that the movies maybe bring in, they touch on, but don't make a lot of about, is about racism and patriarchy in all the movies, and how the voices of the women are subdued in the context of love there. You know, so that's something that comes up. So I'm really intrigued by Erik's movie, and I really want to go and study it a little bit, because when I was doing my dissertation, my supervisor had this intense, and sorry if I'm going on for a little bit long, and I'm not sure whether Erik is actually familiar with this particular book that I'm going to talk about. It's the Puerto Rican Journey to New York, and it's semicolon newest migrants there. And it's written by C. Wright Mills, who's one of the founding fathers of sociology, and a few other authors there. And say, look, so they look at the movement of Puerto Ricans to America from the 1920s, 30s, and in 1940s. And this book is actually published in 1950. So Erik, it sort of, it brings me back to your 4 books, where you're looking at this 4 books and trying to create this narrative about the history of that family's migration. And here, this particular, I think it was a sociological study, but we don't often hear about it, but it so well documents how Puerto Ricans come to New York, how they settle in, assimilate, integrate, and their story of their migration. It was quantitative, but there's also qualitative aspects to it. But the main and important point that I want to actually bring forward is, and just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was at another conference, and we had colleagues from Japan and Korea, and people from talking about migration in Southern Africa, but the narratives are all the same. So given that if we go back to Erik's story about 1850s, right up until now, as he says, the story is always the same. The migrant is always the other. They always, this negative perception and connotation about the migrant. And so as we move, as we evolve, our story about the migrant remains the same, about the diseases they carry, about the negative aspects. And yet we don't look at what are the positive aspects of migration that can bring into our societies. So in a roundabout way, I hope I have answered your question a little bit about how we conceptualize the word crisis, I think.
Thank you. That's amazing. And also the political connotations around the words migrancy, migrants, and how we value them as migrants, and what, how do we look at somebody who has come into the country to bring their degree and to add to the economy on an official basis compared to migrants, how do we view those people? So I think that those themes run through it all. I want to speak to now the aesthetics of the film, because the films were brilliantly made. And specifically the cadences and the rhythms that you find in both of the films, which are both very, very different. Stefan, when I see your films, there's a lot of silences, and quietness in the film, and introspection of your characters that provide so much of insight into what they are going through, the bewilderment of being in no man's land and the fear surrounding that. Can you speak to us a little bit about how you created that visually?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to add something on Pragna's. I think this othering is really the main issue for me in the whole migrant, because it's always, this is happening to somebody else, and I completely agree. We don't really are living in times it can happen to you, any moment, any of us, and that reminded me when we were preparing the film, and then I was giving it for some people to read the script, and then some of the remarks were, but the main problems of the characters in the film are actually not because the main problems are not because they are migrants. Their main problems are because it's a complex love story, and then very kind suggestions would that maybe we should, make them deal with the migrant problems. I thought exactly the beautiful thing and the political statement was that we were not dealing with migrant problems within the migrant, and we really, one of our main idea was not to put migrants only in this position of victim, because at the end of the day, with the filmmaking, it's always about identification. And I think the main thing that our film can contribute is to audience to watch the film, and then at some point to really identify with the characters, and by that process, which is artistic, understand and stop the whole idea of othering, understanding that they could be these characters. Yeah, to go back to the visual style, there is this whole middle part when the main character is taking the voyage alone. At some point he's with a group, and then at some point he really stays alone in the woods, in hostile land. He doesn't know if anybody he sees could report him. He's hiding. This is like a real situation, especially in Hungary at that moment. And I was really, for me, it was important that we, again, identify with him. So we start with something that is a love story. It becomes a road movie, a journey. And then at some point for 20 minutes, the main character is completely alone, and we don't even have dialogue, which was a big director challenge for me, a directorial challenge for me. This journey is very important, and you cannot just start the film with just a journey, and then we tried to, first of all, we established the characters that hopefully the audience cares for, and then as he stays alone, hopefully we are with him, and then we are experiences all the problems and all the obstacles and challenges that the migrants are experiencing. Talking about, and then, one of the things that always pops up my mind, one of our reference films was Casablanca, and nobody thinks of Casablanca as a migrant film, but it's Humphrey Bogart, and I think making this kind of like a love stories that are or treating migrants in a way that they can also have love problems. It's not only about surviving, or this is I think very important, among other things. I mean, and so by the way, the end of our film is really a reference to Casablanca, but instead of a plane, they are in front of a migrant bus. So yes, definitely these are the stories that keep repeating, and the question, my main question is, how do we actually engage? And how do we how to stop just saying this is happening to somebody else? I think it can happen to us any day, and it's important to I think I made a point to keep this humanity and to understand.
That's beautiful, Stefan. Thank you. That really is insightful in terms of your humanity as a filmmaker, and the same with you, Erik. I mean, your actors, they were a tour de force. Can you speak to us a little bit about the aesthetics of your film, and why you use particular techniques in making up the film? What films did you reference in the making of your film?
In some sort of basic, I spend a lot of time with my actors between 12 and 16 weeks of preparations. I've done that on mostly of my movies, whether they are huge movie stars or amateurs. I bring them in, and I work with the script, and I work with the characters and the situations with them. A lot of time are also in preparation to learn how to behave in those conditions. Just the shoes that they wear at that time, you need to learn to walk in these shoes, so it looks natural. So there is a lot of elements, and during that process, you start to learn about the characters, about the conditions, and about the environment that we are sort of put our story into. And I'm basically, well, I'm really deeply into working with actors. So that's sort of a really big part of movies. And I want to support them in their performances so they really can feel, you know, brave enough to go into this and do it as honestly and truthful as possible. That means we need to learn to know the story. We need to learn how, you know, who this story is about. And also, of course, for each one of them to learn to know, you know, the immigrants also, who they are, and to learn their story. But most of all, then, how I have been, I wanted to remove the distance between that this is a story taking place in a period of time which was long ago, but act as it's a contemporary story, and try to raise the feeling of presence, of being part in the story for the audience, to feel more, you know, into the story. So my choices is very often to go close, strip down all the other elements, and just go really close into the characters and the situations. And I, in almost all my scenes, whether it just are 2-3 minute scenes or 7, 8, 9 minute scene, I film them in one single. So I allow the actors to perform being the scene without pretending the camera, not playing towards the camera. So whether I'm working with Juliette Binoche or someone else, you know, who have been doing that, who it's in her DNA, or I'm working with other actors as in this film, I need to start to make them forget about the camera. And I'm setting up the scenes and allowing them to perform, or just to go into the scene and exploring the scene while I'm filming. So I just wanted to be as truthful and honest as I can. And for this film also, I of course removed all artificial lights. I did film it all in natural light, even in the interiors.
Wow.
I made the buildings, I placed the buildings with windows for the time in the day when we wanted to film, and did that into details. So it's all done, and with the candlelights are just single normal candlelights and filmed in their, you know, hard light conditions, but it made something to it, and it also supported the actors to feel much more comfortable and brave. And I also think they ended up looking much more beautiful, removing all lamps.
Thank you. Having said that, I'm sitting in the dark right now.
You are, Liza.
Yes, I am. And I haven't been able to reach out to the light switch out there, but so I have my cell phone on me and looking a little bit like a ghost, but as long as you can see that, I didn't want to leave you at all to go switch the lights on. But yeah, just incredible filmmakers. That's both of you. And I wanted to go back to the statements that you think, the most important statements that you wanted to make when you made these films. What statement did you want to make about migrancy, about people? And maybe Stefan, I think you've already covered it.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it was more, it's basically this, what the film is great about, it's recognizing yourself in somebody else. And so for our domestic audience, it's using something that is really very traditional and part of your tradition. Everybody knows this poem. And then you're seeing somebody else, you know, contemporary migrants, recreating this story. So in a way, of course, I'm listening to Erik, and I have a feeling, I could sign most of the things that he said. And of course, there are people who are offended by it, and right wing, and but most of the people really reacted quite well. And I think this is the main thing, this is they thought, oh, this is something interesting. We are seeing our heritage in completely different way, in contemporary way, and it kind of, instead of having something that is, in a museum, dusty and shouldn't move, it's alive, it's there, and it's, new. You can see it with the fresh eyes. And I think that was the main idea for me, for the domestic audience. For the international audience, who of course doesn't know the epic story, it was more like a love story. It's like something that, it's incredibly hard. I learned that to people to draw the audience to cinema to watch the refugee story. People have a feeling, they have enough of hardship. Yeah. So what we try is, and a lot of times then people would come to me and say, oh, but it's actually a love story. And it is, but love story that also tells about and this is the main point, understanding that, there is no difference, and this is not some, again, other people.
And Erik, to you as well, what do you think was the final statement? And I mean, I think it's really brave filmmaking. What final statement did you want your audience to feel, your viewer to feel?
Well, I want to, what do you
want them to go away with?
Yeah, I wanted to remind us all about our sort of responsibility as human beings, what it is. It's about taking care of our close one, of our loved ones. It's about taking care of the ones coming to us. It's about taking care of this world. It's about the deepest, conditions for humanity. And also, so I wanted to sort of remind us all about, that our deepest responsibility as human beings, it is to taking care of other ones. By doing so, we both, of course, we feel better, but that's basically the reason for being part of this world. And it's there will forever be people who have to flee from their country or from their part of the world, and people who need support, who need our support and our understanding, but also look into the complexity of their situation, the complexity of arriving to a new country, a new world, and look into that. So, well, it's hard to simplify it to this one single sentence. I wish I could, yeah, I think that's my message, really.
Thank you. Pragna, would you like to? I mean, migration is going to happen. It's been from time immemorial, and it's going to continue from time immemorial. But if there's one element of migration that the world can look at that brings a new way of seeing, what would you think that is?
I think for me, what these two stories really portray is about authenticity. And for me, that really came out very strongly. So I might just raise a few hackles here because, I'm a scholar in the Global South, and sometimes when I listen to the research and presentations from scholars up north, I find them very cold and clinical. They're very, they're also steeped in quantitative stuff, and they don't give the human side of the story of the migrants at all. And this is what these two beautiful movies actually do, and that is why when Erik was talking and Stefan, the word and those silences allow that authenticity of the narrative to come through. And there's something that I'm very passionate about, is that as a scholar on the African continent, our stories are often told by other people. They are not told by the African voices. And I'm so passionate about this that even our research needs to be told from us, our voices. And this is what I want to convey. And I don't know if I have the liberty here, and you can tell me if to stop where, but at the center that I'm currently visiting, last year they conducted a movie, or they conducted a project where we looked at, and I think there were 20 researchers across the world. So we had a researcher and we had a protagonist, a migrant whose story we told. Can I give the title of this? Because I think it would be so fascinating to both of you. It's called, sorry, let me just look at it because I didn't give you the correct thing. It's actually Migrant Lives in Pandemic Times. It's called Migrant Lives in Pandemic Times. And so we each had to make, with our cell phones, a 10-minute story. And I mean, we were all novices. We had no clue of how to take. But the beautiful part about this is that we listened to the narratives of the migrants in different countries. So they were obviously, because of the pandemic, they were stuck in the different countries. So the researchers had to choose a particular migrant in any kind of work, or someone that they had access to, or they were willing to tell their stories. And so we have these snapshots or narratives about these different migrants stuck in these host countries and talking about how the pandemic affected them. And it's just the most beautiful, evocative stories that we came up with. And it's something that I think both of you would really enjoy doing, listening to, not doing, but listening to, because it would, you know, it enhances this whole story about who the migrant is. How does the conditions today affect them? How were they affected during the pandemic? How did the loneliness, the lack of family, just everything, you know, in the small 10-minute narrative, we had to tell their life story, in fact. And so, yeah, the stories were just hugely evocative, I think. And it's something there was a roadshow, there was a launch of it, but I'm sure many people obviously didn't know enough about it. But I think it would resonate so well with Erik and Stefan's stories as well.
Pragna, thank you very much for that. I think we're going to be rounding up now. But just quickly, if you have anything that you would like to add to our listening audience, especially with regards to gradients of marginalization when it comes to race and migration. Can anybody speak to that? And I think you touched upon that, Stefan, in your film, when we saw the refugees from Syria being let through, and these Ghanaian refugees had to wait a period of time, etc. Of course, there are different kinds of migrants who are leaving for different kinds of reasons. But are there gradients of acceptance to different migrants? Also, when you look at the Ukrainian issue right now in Europe?
Well, I absolutely agree. I think it's unfortunately, I have to agree. And if you think, I mean, the Ukrainian crisis happened after I finished the film, and I was actually really moved how this new wave of refugees was met. They were accepted. There was a systematic response to it. People felt empathy, and there was place for them in Europe, and I felt like, oh, okay, this is some change for the migrants and refugees. Unfortunately, for the people I made a film about, nothing really changed. And if you start thinking, why is that like that? I mean, there are obviously, several possible answers, and none of them really I like, you know, and they are all disturbing. And I'm really, yeah, disturbed by this fact that, you know, for some refugees there is an acceptance, there is an understanding, and for others not.
Thank you for that, Stefan. There is a question for you, Erik, on the chat line, and it says it's from Zama Sibaya, sorry. She says, love the lineage continuity in Christina and Martha's stories. I loved how home is fluid and everywhere, yet unique in a given moment. This was brilliantly done. The migration story paints America invitingly, despite the recent challenges of global migration. Would the narrative be the same today for Europeans in distress caught in the web of migration?
No, I would say unfortunately not. As I mentioned earlier, it's there is a different world for the migrants to what they arrive into. And that's, of course, the huge difference between arriving in North America in the 1840s and Europe today. But of course, also for a lot of the people who arrived in North America, the conditions changed there as well. And so that's, I think there's absolutely big differences between those two stories, but still there are so many similarities in the reason why people have to leave, and why in the deep need we all have for having a safe, secure home, a place where we can bring our children and where we can put our soil into the ground and make food and not be hungry. So I think that's a deep need we all have to find a home. And sometimes, you know, the question is, when you come to a new territory or a new country or a new, you know, continent, who am I in this world? And are these, am I sort of establishing myself into this world, or are the world establishing itself into me? You know, what is a home? Will a home be the place where I was born? Will my home be the place where I raised my kids? Or will the home be the place where I was able to sort of get the food and everything and feel, you know, now I'm home and secure. So the issue about what is a home is general for all of us, you know. But I would just like to add a comment to what Stefan said, which I really think is so important and was brilliant said. And I would like to, you know, but I would like to emphasize the world today, and when we see the refugees, who they are, and how we have been opening our hearts and our homes for the refugees coming from Ukraine, which I really support and I think is really, really great. But I'm upset. I'm deeply upset, almost to being angry, because what we see, and I've known this issue for several decades. I know how, especially the Western world, look on immigrants, and I knew that we would, of course, open our homes for the people coming from Ukraine. But what about the people coming from North Africa, coming from the South Central Asia? You know, I knew, but still, I'm shocked about how we put them in groups. Deeply angry about that. I think it's so bad. You know, we are all humans. You know, they are all humans. We are all humans. So what are the difference? You know, people will, for every moment, in every year, for every decade, use sort of their you know, we all have an option to go for our dreams. We can all, you know, we can't divide people into groups. If you have if you have a dream for going for a better life, you can go for it from whichever territory, whichever country you come from. And of course, an ongoing war, a conflict, and I know because I've been covering so many of them, I know how that is. But even people who are coming not because of they're coming from a war conflict, but because they carry a dream of a better life. They have a reason to do that, and we need to accept it because we have been there ourselves. So in the end, I'm terrified, I'm upset, and I'm angry about what we see.
Your next film, Erik. That's your next film.
Probably it will come.
Yeah, I want to thank all of you, and I just want to say this was a remarkable conversation, and just thank you for making your brilliant films. Thank you, and continue to do so, because we need this kind of filmmaking in the world. We really need brave filmmaking that makes people think very seriously about some of the issues that affect this world in so many different ways. And Pragna, thank you for giving us your insights and your research and also your passion for what you do. You feel very deeply on a humane level, and that was wonderful to see. So thank you to all of you. Thank you for your deep conversation, and I look forward to seeing new films from you, Erik, and from you, Stefan. Go well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.